and the Chamber is now recognized as the leading binational business organization that builds mutually beneficial trade and investment relationships in North America and in Mexico. Before continuing, I want to thank our sponsors for supporting the webinar today. Our sponsors are, in no particular order, the Hong Kong Association of Southern California, WIT Los Angeles, CWCPAs, and Carlton Fields. I'd like to offer any of the sponsors a few moments to explain what their organization does. And if you'd like to take a moment, anybody from the Hong Kong Association of Southern California?
Mark, I'm here. I saw Dennis earlier. I was going to propose that he say a few words, but I don't see him now. So let me speak a little bit to that. The Hong Kong Association of Southern California, HKASC, is a trade organization that works closely with the Hong Kong Trade and Development Council, the HKTDC, in promoting the interests of Hong Kong businesses doing business in California and working with basically companies from Los Angeles, Orange County, all the way down to San Diego County, assuring that they do bilateral work together, promote events, we promote all the way up to Seattle, anything that has to do with trade development between Hong Kong and the United States, although we are called the Southern California Organization.
Terrific. Thank you very much, Malcolm. Anyone from WIT?
If there's anybody from WIT, Mark.
Okay, CWCPAs? Going once.
Good morning, Mark. Yes, now I mute my mic now. So good morning to everyone, and good morning to all the participants, who joined this webinar. I'm very honored, to be here. Thanks for the invitation. And my firm, CWCPA, is a CPA firm, accounting firm in Hong Kong. We also have 3 offices in China, mainly Shenzhen, Guangzhou, and also Shanghai. Basically, our business not just only embrace accounting and auditing, but we also lure or, help to promote, China and Hong Kong, bringing a lot of overseas clients, especially from America and also from Latin America. Bringing them, through Hong Kong to invest in China, particularly nowadays in the Greater Bay Area. So very unique is that, I have a team of Latin American staff. I have 3 Mexican staff working for me, 1 from Panama, 1 from Argentina, and also 1 from Spain, and 2 from Brazil. And that is why I think that, we are very unique in Hong Kong. We bring a lot of Latin American companies, from Latin America via Hong Kong to China, especially Greater Bay Area. So that is my brief introduction. Yep. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a quick commercial for my law firm, Carlton Fields. We're an international law firm. We represent businesses and life companies, do regulatory work, CMBS, agency lenders, real estate funds, and consumer brand companies that do the typical M&A, negotiating and documenting a range of different kinds of transactions. And I'm the West Coast chair of the Business Transactions and Finance Group at Carlton Fields. A quick word about our 3 accomplished business people and 2 lawyers on the panel today. Mauricio Monroy, who will be moderating the panel, and he is a CPA and focuses on cross-border accounting matters. Harley Seaden, who's an expert in China affairs. Tom Wong, who you just heard from, who's a founding partner of CWCPAs. Valerie Wang, who is an attorney with Dentons in China. Malcolm McNeil is a partner with Arent Fox. Arent Fox is an international law firm. And Malcolm is the co-leader of the Arent Fox International Group. I'd also like to say very accomplished. I'm a former partner of Malcolm's, and you're in for a treat in this conference. So as we'll all find out, our premise is really supply chain, what changes have been evolving in the last 3 months. Certainly, I would say since the COVID-19 outbreak, and where not only China but the world has been involved in quarantines and lockdowns against this very virulent disease that has caused many deaths. It's also causing dramatic changes in people's thinking of long supply chains versus short supply chains versus the developments in the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement that will emphasize, I think, inbound companies to establish themselves in Mexico and the United States to shorten up those supply chains. And so I will leave it to Mauricio, you to begin the panel, and thank you very much.
Let me see, maybe Mauricio is muted.
Well, I'm happy to rattle on, but
Is that
I'm sure
okay
he'll
now?
join in a moment.
Oh, we can hear you, Mauricio,
Sorry.
yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, it was my fault. Yeah, well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Okay, here, depending upon where you are. Thank you very much, Mark, for your kind introduction. Marlene, thank you also for your kind introduction and leadership in this webinar. And as was mentioned before, I am privileged to be the Vice President of the ASHA initiative of our California Regional Chapter of the US-Mexico Chamber of Commerce. And this time we have indeed a first-class panel, okay, that will let us know about the lessons the world can learn from China after lifting their lockdown, reopening their economy and business and going back to normal. But before we start with our speakers, may I share with you some information that I just found out last Friday that I was really delighted, and because this is a very interesting coincidence. In April of 1911, so that's indeed, well, April, we're in April also, 1911, that's 109 years ago. There was a plague in China, in northern China, in the Manchuria area. Okay? And Mukden, you can see it on the slide. Mukden is one of the cities in Manchuria where the outbreak started of this plague. But after this plague, what is very, very interesting is that the emperor in those days, China was still under, the last emperor of the Qing dynasty, okay, and then it was indeed his last year, because in 1912 is when, as you may recall, China became a republic. Okay, so then the emperor, said after this plague that killed 60,000 people, the death rate to infected people was 100% practically. So then he said, well, this shouldn't happen. We should, share all this with the world, because they were able to contain the plague. And the leader was a young Chinese doctor, Dr. Li, okay? And then he invited various countries to have a conference in Mukden. And this was the International Plague Mukden Conference that took place in April of 1911. And then, the first thing is that, again, this was a pneumonic plague, not bubonic plague, because initially they thought that it was a bubonic plague that were the ones in Europe. You may recall in the 15th century and other plagues in Europe were basically, bubonic plague. But this was not a bubonic plague, it was a pneumonic plague that is very similar to COVID-19, by the way. And it was in Manchuria, and this International Plague Conference took almost 1 month, from April the 3rd to April the 28th, and included 11 nations. Seems to me that this is the first part of this information that really caught my eye and really motivated me to share with you this, okay? Because of those 11 nations included doctors from Mexico, the United States, and China. So that is really fascinating. So as we can see in the next chart, if we may please, there were very specific, goals of the conference to define the origins of the plague, because they didn't know how it origined. And by the way, this is a topic today with the COVID-19. Then how the outbreak was handled, because as I mentioned before, it was contained, okay? And so that was a wonderful work, okay, of all of the doctors and scientists, and led by Dr. Lee. I'm sorry, it's Dr. Wu. So then how the outbreak was handled was important also to discuss in the conference, so that information would be shared with the world to be prepared for future pandemics. This was in 1911. And finally, measures to prevent future epidemics. So those were the three main goals. There was a report that you can read, okay, a report that was written by Dr. Wu. And there have been a number of subsequent publications, because this has been something that I learned last Friday. This has been a very important reference, okay, for the world nowadays as far as how to handle COVID-19 crisis. So then you can find a lot of information in the internet. I'm not an expert on this. I simply had the good luck of finding this information in the internet in a story by CNN. So if we can see in the next chart, on the next chart, you will see, okay, that this is really the remarks made by Paul French of CNN. He made these remarks, okay, that are fascinating, okay, because this again is something that was concluded back in 1911. And he says on his article published last Friday, lockdowns, quarantine measures, the wearing of masks, interesting, travel restrictions, mass cremation of victims, and border controls were deployed to try to lower the infection rate. Isn't this amazing? So since today we're going to be learning from our distinguished panelists, lessons to learn from them, and it's going to be fascinating. Well, I thought that this would be a wonderful introduction to say, well, we can start to learn from the way that China handled the plague back in 1911. So then I believe this is really fascinating. And well, on the next chart, very briefly, and we will start with our panelists, I just want to simply see also why we need to learn from China. In the world, there were, until April the 17th, 2.4 million cases of COVID-19, recoveries 623,000. So that means 26% of the people infected have recovered. And in the case of China, there have been 83,000 cases, of which 77,000 have recovered. So that means that is a 93% rate of recovery. That is wonderful. Okay, so then we want to know how they did it. Okay, so then I believe that this is then precisely one of the reasons, or one of the goals, and I just wanted to share this information with you as to why we have to pay attention to our friends in China that very generously will be sharing their insights and experiences. And then finally, on the last chart of my presentations, something that the IMF published last April the 6th is their forecast for the GDP growth for 2020 and 2021. And something interesting is that they already labeled this COVID-19 pandemic. They call it the Great Lockdown. Okay, so I don't know if that will be a label or a term that to be coined, okay, for this crisis, okay, but the IMF at least is using this the Great Lockdown term. So now you can see that in 2020, well, the world, they project, will have a decrease in the GDP of 3%, But the good news is that by 2021, they project 5.8%. This was last April 6th. So this is already considering the impact of the pandemic all over the world. In the case of China, well, for 2020, they project 1.2% growth in the GDP. And see this, for 2021, they project 4.7% growth. That is even higher than the rates we see or we saw before 2008. That was the last great recession. And in the case of the US, also the numbers are very encouraging. For 2020, it's expected a big hit of 5.9% in the GDP growth. However, for 2021, it is a very, very attractive and promising 4.7% rate of growth in the US GDP. And finally, in the case of Mexico, well, Mexico, as you compare to the other examples we have here, is the one that will be really, really hit hard with a 6.6 decrease in the GDP growth. But the good news is that by 2021, well, the IMF projects a 3% growth in the Mexican economy. That is below what the Mexican government would like to have, and of course the private sector would like to have, but it's not bad at all. My point here in summary is that although in 2020, of course, well, we expect a very dire panorama on the economy, it seems based on the IMF, okay, that, well, it's a very experienced organization, very objective organization. Well, they have made these projections to share with us. Well, saying that, we're going to start with our distinguished panel. And first, you can see on your screen Dr. Harley Sayedin and his resume. Doctor, thank you very, very, very much for joining us. I am delighted to see you again, okay, and we're really privileged for your time and the opportunity of hearing your insights on our topic, okay? And I'm gonna just briefly let you know about some salient aspects of Mr. Sayedin's resume that is a lengthy one, okay? Well, he's the president of the American Chamber of Commerce in South China, where he led its growth from 211 members to 2,000 members. And also his impressive history of achievements in international business, humanitarian activities, and philanthropy are very, very salient. I will give some examples. And he's a world-renowned China expert, real China expert, Dr. Sayedin. Well, in his business achievements in China, for example, he directed companies, including the first majority Western-owned operated power plant in China, the first Western invested toll road in China, and the first US accredited US university. So with those business achievements, well, that's good enough, right, to learn from Dr. Sayedin, but that's not it. If you see some highlights of the awards that he has received, first is the 217 Oslo Business for Peace Award that he received along with Elon Musk, the founder of Tesla. Okay? And this was with out of 40 countries presented nominees. And Dr. Harley Sayedin was one of the awardees. Also, he received the Peace Through Commerce Medal, that is the highest honor awarded to a civilian by the US Department of Commerce. He's a knight under the Philippine Act of Parliament 646. These other people that has also received this recognition is Henry Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, and the King of Spain, for example. So you can see, okay, the stature of this recognition. And he was also recognized by President George Bush for his involvement with NAFTA. So then, well, Dr. Sayedin knows very, very well how NAFTA operates. And of course, in this triangle of business that we've been discussing in our chamber for 10 years now, of China, Mexico, and the US, well, he knows very well what we're talking about, evidently. And finally, but not less important, is the humanitarian achievements. I just want to mention one, okay, because there are so many beautiful things that Dr. Sayedin has done. But for example, he raised $3 million that were given to impoverished Chinese villages. And this grant raised the people, the population of these 3 villages above the poverty line. This is wonderful achievement, and also saved hundreds of lives of children that were living in very poor condition and didn't have access to quality health services. So then my respect to Dr. Sayedin for all these beautiful achievements. And finally, well, he is a PhD from the University of the Incarnate Word, UIW, in San Antonio, Texas. Well, Harley, please, the mic is all yours.
Good morning, Mauricio. It's very nice to see you. Marlon, very nice to see you again, even though from far away on video. Very happy
Pleasure to have you here, Harley.
Thank you. Very happy to be with you this morning. I know I sent you some slides, but we really don't need to go through all of them. One of the most important things for us to do during this period of time is focus on facts. There's a lot of information out there. I was reading one study that as of today, there is more than 70 years worth of reading material about the virus online today. So sifting through the facts is extremely important. Knowing what the facts are extremely important. What we have focused on here as American Chamber of Commerce in South China is trying to become the center for trustworthy news, as we have disseminated working with different entities to our members. Just to put a little commercial about the American Chamber of Commerce in South China, we are just over 2,300 members. Our membership now accounts for nearly 40% of all U.S.-China business, trade, and investment. And we focus on trying to do more and more between the U.S. and China as far as trading is concerned. We conducted a study very recently on how our companies are doing, especially on the supply chain. We have actually done 3 different studies, and which we released just a couple of weeks ago. One is called this 2020 State of Business in South China. It's a 150-page bilingual quantitative study of business, how many people they're hiring, what they're doing, what is the impact of different issues on their business. And a 550-page analysis of all the regulatory changes that were taking place in China and the business environment all over China that we have published. This one is in 13th year. The other study is in his 16th year. Our latest study shows that with great support from the government, 95% of our companies already are fully operational. 93% of the factories are fully operational. And of course, staffing is just over 85%. And this is quite commendable, knowing that most of the workers had actually traveled home for Chinese holidays, which was extended by a couple of weeks. But as of the March 1st, we had fully operational entities. I have had a number of video conferences with our membership, with the executives, even as early as yesterday. What we have realized is rather than thinking that a lot of work has been shifted out of China, the reality is that our companies report that they are very busy. They're mostly working overtime, and a great deal of production that was being performed in countries south of China, in Asia Pacific, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, etc., Indonesia, India, etc., is being shifted to China simply because China is now fully back at work, and those countries are now in lockdown. So this is working out in ways that we never anticipated, but the reality is that some of our companies are actually showing that. I know there was one company I was speaking to yesterday, multinational, which said that they were experiencing about a 40% increase in production capacity, in production and volume. Now, the study that we've done, of course, we did was a comprehensive study of 237 companies. Of those companies, 57% were American, 20% were mainland companies, and 14% were from European Union and Asia Pacific countries. We realized that a combination of these companies in the study where we had 48% multinational corporations, medium companies 42%, and small businesses 10%. We continue to break down the numbers, and we know that the companies that we studied were 76%. There were 76% manufacturing, wholesale and retail 20%, and logistic companies made up the difference. One of the questions that we focused on was, and this is a few weeks, about 3 weeks ago, was whether or not they had adequate supplies in order to manufacture what they want. And this is where we realized that there is some significant concern. 32% of the companies told us at that time that they were already short on components, supplies, or material to continue to operate or manufacture. 12% of that 30% was actually already out of components. So they were significantly impacted by the supply chain itself. The question that we then asked is, when do they expect to run out of the material or components? We saw that 43% expected to run out completely within 3 months of operating from this study, and 37% expected to be running out within just a month. So we were very concerned about that. The question that we had was, how long do you think the shortage of supplies and components will last? And 80% expected 3 months. And of course, some expected for it to be 6 months, etc. Now, we continue to check to see to what extent their manufacturing ability has been disrupted or impacted by the issues. And we literally 100% of the companies reported that they have been impacted in one fashion or another. And what we asked them is, what are the issues that are impacting their ability to have components, and logistics was a very big factor in that area. Now, when we look to see where the shortage of components or supplies and materials was coming from, at that point, 81% was primarily associated with logistics and ability of production of the parts and components in China. But we also realized that that problem has been going away quite rapidly, as government officials in China have been working very hard to make sure that they alleviate the problems with logistics, delivery, warehousing, and other issues. And we know that problem is going away quite fast. But at the same time, we realized that 18% of the shortage of material component supplies was actually attributed to companies including US, Europe, Korea, Japan, and some of the other Asia-Pacific countries. And what we've seen since then is the shrinkage of Chinese contribution to the difficulty in a very significant way, but at the same time, an increase in difficulties associated with companies, countries outside of China, including European Union, US, and Japan, Korea, and some other Asia-Pacific countries. Now, when we talked about availability, one of the things that's going to be happening is, of course, if people cannot manufacture properly in China, where would the shortages of the final products would be most affected? And of course, we noticed that 63% of the availability of product will impact the Chinese, because one of the things that we do realize is that 71%, as of our latest study, 71% of, for example, American companies that are based in South China, members of the American Chamber of Commerce in South China, are no longer in the export business. They are here primarily producing goods and services in China for the Chinese market. So they are also supplying quite a bit of products, end products to the Chinese market. So China will be affected 63%. At the same time, there's expectation that APAC will be impacted. The United States, 22% of them expect that the United States will be impacted with availability of supplies, etc. Now, when we consider the impact, we will need to do a new study just to make sure that we fully understand this ever-changing, the ever-changing dynamics that are involved in the supply chain. But I believe that what will happen is the fact that it is not as much the virus that will be impacting the production and the GDP of the different countries, but the supply chain, its availability, the ability to be able to move products around is going to be a major factor. I actually see China as recovering, of course, ahead of all other countries. The biggest concern for China at this point is a recurrence of the outbreak. They're being extremely careful. All the borders are closed 100% to all foreign nationals, non-Chinese. Chinese returning to China are quarantined without exception for 14 days at a government designated hotel at their own cost. The flights have been limited to one flight per carrier per country per week. So that limits the number of returnees to China to a manageable number that they can deal with. If you take a Chinese flight today on China Southern or any one other airline, you will see that the flight attendants are dressed in hazmat suits and masks and visors and other protective gear. The airplanes look more like a hospital, flying hospital, than they would a commercial flight. The reduction in commercial transportation, of course, has impacted the ability of goods being delivered. Transportation of goods out of China and into China is heavily impacted simply because a great deal of transportation of goods was being handled by commercial aircraft that now has to totally depend on cargo flights. There's a limited number of those that are available. But what I will see is that I do expect that China will grow far more than the 1.2% that's predicted this year. And I think it will contribute to the world growth as it has in the past. My suggestion to the rest of the countries in the world would be that at this point, there is really no other option except isolation and lockdown and lack of contact between people in order to beat this virus. And therefore, we have to make some tough decisions in every country and accept the fact that until we have until we have a vaccine, that isolation is the only choice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Harley, for your insights. And
Thank you very much, Harley.
yeah, may I ask you a question? Well, here you're showing us, of course, in one of the very first slides, how the business has coming back to action in China. But when do you think the business or the economy will be back at full speed in China? Okay, because we, if I understood correctly, they're still, although it's 85% is the lowest number that I saw. All others are 93% activity. When do you expect, or what is it expected? Okay, when is it expected that China, the economy will be back at full speed?
Well, I happened to be here when SARS hit, and in 2003, and SARS, of course, was right here in Guangzhou as ground zero. It took quite some time for people to actually go out and spend time and spend money and frequent the various restaurants or live life as normal. I expect that it will take some time before people will have full confidence in being out and having complete activity. I would think that probably by the last quarter of 2020, we are going to see fairly normal business activity, but that really depends a great deal on what other countries will do. I expect that China will not be able to open its borders to all other countries because the virus can return with a single traveler who may go under the radar. They have to stay vigilant in order to protect themselves, to solve that problem. I think the opening is going to happen one country at a time with strict quarantine requirements, etc. That probably will take a good bit of this year, probably the first 3/4 of this year. And once that happens, then of course we're going to see some normalization. What we need to look at is the fact that, of course, when you look at the United States GDP, 70% of it is consumer spending. But at the same time, when we look at what percent of that 70% of U.S. GDP that's personal consumer expenditures goes to China, the total number is really 1.2%. It is the number itself is very large. It's somewhere around $400 billion, but as a percentage of the GDP of the United States, it's quite small. Its export to the U.S. accounts for about 3% of China's GDP, just over that. So when we move away from that, you will see that China is going to have to depend a great deal on its own consumer market in order to recover. And that is something that we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you very much, Harley. Let me ask you another question. You know America very well. You know China, and you experienced, okay, the full episode of COVID-19 in China, from the outbreak to the recovery, okay? So now, knowing America, knowing business in America, our culture, the way we do business, our psychology, what recommendations would you make to business people in this part of the world, in particular in the US and Mexico, as far as measures or any tips that you could give us, so to speak, as far as how to surpass all these crises successfully?
Well, certainly my suggestion, and of course my observation, is that today COVID-19 is being used as an excuse by many people for why they cannot do something. I think this is an opportunity. There's a silver lining in every cloud, and this is when we can get innovative and we can continue to produce and make a difference in the society. We have an obligation to make our economy work in the United States, in Mexico, as they do in China. We have an obligation to find new ways to continue to function. Life goes on. People still have to eat, they have to wear clothes, they have to keep themselves entertained. And I think today's video teleconference is a perfect example of us adopting to new changes, finding new ways of making sure life goes on. There are companies that have no choice but to continue to produce for the country in order for the country to survive. There are those who may have to shut down in order to wait for their time to contribute to the society. So I think we have an obligation to innovate, to find new ways of doing business, and to take advantage of every opportunity. It's like any other time in history, in adversity, some people thrive, and some people, of course, will go under, and that's a natural course of things to happen.
That is correct. Thank you, Harley. Well, any final remarks that you would like to make, or anything that you would like to share with our audience that we didn't cover in our dialogue?
I only have one thing to say, really. I think our job at this point is to let people know that there's hope. We are, human beings. Ingenuity is what will solve all the problem. Eventually, we will find a way to combat this disease permanently and forever. I think people have learned from this lesson that we need to be prepared for another one. I had an email from a friend of mine who is a bureau chief at New York Times, and he pointed out that was quoted in 2006 in an article that he wrote about, Keith Bradshaw, who wrote about being prepared for an outbreak, and this is some 14 years ago, and he had quoted me as saying that it is not if this is going to happen, it is when it's going to happen, so we have to be prepared. The fact is that we need to learn and not forget about this, because this is not the first time it's happened. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Harley. Thank you very much for your generous comments and recommendations. And well, now I'm going to pass the mic to Mr. Thomas Wong. Okay, Thomas. Well, I'm going to briefly just say also a lot of his achievements and of his biography. Okay, well, first of all, I must also say that, well, Thomas is also a good friend and professional ally. He's a CPA. As he mentioned before, okay, he founded the CPA firm in Hong Kong, CWCPA. He's a founding partner of CWCPA. And CWCPA is an international mid-sized professional accounting and advisory firm based in Hong Kong. He already told us they have also offices in other parts of China. And also they got, by the way, business desks in Barcelona and in London. Okay, so then they are well prepared to serve international business. Okay, and then I must stress that Latin America and Spain are at the top of Thomas' agenda. Okay, he's since more probably 14 years ago that he started to be very interested and in this Latin America and Spain, and he has been very, very successful in developing this practice for his firm. In 2006, he established a Latin American Spanish advisory business unit that is now a fully developed department in CWCPA, exclusively serving the Spanish and Portuguese-speaking clients, and professional service firm model that, as he said, is still unique in Hong Kong. Okay, and well, he already mentioned to us, okay, that he's got people from various countries, but he didn't mention that there are 3 Mexicans also, okay, in his staff, okay. So then he's very well prepared in offering the service in Spanish and knowing the culture of all those countries. And Thomas and his team regularly travel to Latin America, Spain and Portugal to assist enterprises to establish their physical presence in mainland China. He's very active business developer, collaborating with consulates from Latin America, Spain, and Portugal to host business delegations. He's an investment promotion ambassador of Invest Hong Kong. This is a position that is very prominent. International advisor of Guangzhou Municipal Board for International Investment. Well, Thomas, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Mike is all yours.
Thank you, Mauricio. Thanks a lot for your kind introduction. So taking this opportunity as an accountant that has been in business for over 30 years, so I would like to share with all the people that are now participating in this webinar that whenever there is a crisis, there is always hope. Do not be afraid of any crisis. Do not be afraid of any challenges. Any crisis, there is a silver lining, as just what Harley just mentioned. All right. So actually, I see that this crisis, yes, it has disrupted life a lot, but at the same time, conversely, it created a lot of opportunity to businessmen like me. Number one is that during this crisis, as early as February, when really the crisis took hit, in China. So I very, very promptly, I have already, developed what I call the shift duty work mode. That is to say that apart from working from home, that I have adopted right away. And then number 2 is that I have adopted A and B working mode. That is to say that if staff are allocated to Group A, they only have to come back to office on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And for staff are allocated to Group B, they are only have to come back to work on Tuesday and Thursday. And it is still, I'm still adopting this approach as an accountant, doing you know, a lot of services for overseas businessmen and overseas you know, clients, and it still works. And actually, 25% of my income, of my firm's income, is derived, you know, from China. But I personally, I see that now that the trend of my increase in revenue would be, you know, increasing in China, not only from 25% of the whole firm, it will be 30% this year. Now, to give everyone a sense of hope is that the first quarter of this year, our firm's total revenue with 100 staff, 1,000 clients, I do not cut any single staff, no salary cut at all. My revenue for the first quarter year on year compared with last year, despite of COVID, is just only 20,000 Hong Kong dollar less than last quarter of the same year. So in other words, you know, it's just less than 1%. So I just now when Harley was sharing, you know, with the participants that, you know, everyone is talking a lot of excuses because of COVID, why one cannot do this, one cannot do that. But I try to be, you know, try to set an example to not only my colleagues, but also to my overseas clients, to the Chinese colleagues, to the Chinese community, to overseas friends that I know that I can do it, you know, despite of COVID. I can arrange, you know, work from home. I can arrange shift duty approach. I can arrange flexi hours. And the Chinese colleagues, you know, are helping me tremendously. So therefore, my revenue was not affected at all. And one discovery I have discovered, you know, during COVID is that, you know, I have to upgrade my IT system, that which I'm now doing it, you know, day by day. Not only with the EPN, not only with the personal computer that the staff are now using at home because they are still working at home with the A and B, you know, shift. This is also applicable in Hong Kong as well. So the trend that I see, you know, in the forthcoming years is that, you know, people would treasure family a lot after COVID. They are now accustomed to lockdown at home. So they like working at home, you know. So, you know, to keep this trend alive, I am very ready to stand ready that I will adopt this approach, you know, in the future, because family and health is my motto. And remember, the fundamental value of Chinese is family is most important. Family values are very, very important. So if I can accommodate my staff, not only in Hong Kong, but also in China, that they can also look after the family in whatever circumstances, be it there's a crisis, be it no crisis, you know, your business will flourish. Now, so I'm now talking as an accountant from the back office, not talking as a manufacturer. But if I may, I would like to show some positive signs to the participants that, as I mentioned earlier, or Mauricio, you introduced me earlier that, you know, I have set up my Latin American unit, and then I've, you know, bringing a lot of delegations overseas, you know, to Hong Kong and to China. Yes, I'm still doing this, you know, but now I'm doing a lot of webinars right now. But my business, in fact, you know, can be justified or reflected in the incoming inquiries that I have for China. Now, as of yesterday, I have just for China alone, I have 30 inquiries from overseas. 30 inquiries, meaning that that overseas companies from Latin America, from USA, from even Chicago. I got an inquiry from Chicago this morning that they want to set up a joint venture in Shenzhen. You know, the incoming inquiries that I'm having is a testament that, you know, China is still flourishing. You know, so manufacturing plants, yes, they are basically open over 80% already. Business, you know, it's back to, I would say, 90% normal. The incoming inquiries I have, yes, is 30, but mainly, you know, from, for example, I have a few from Brazil, I have a few from America, I have a few from Mexico, one from Uruguay, and one from Spain, and one from France, And what is also of interest is that I received one inquiry that I'm now trying to help a retail chain, a European retail chain, that to set up their HR platform. I'm working with an IT supplier. IT is going to be very, very hit in China right now. And with a lot of overseas clients that they cannot come to China because of the traveling ban or because of the quarantine that they have to face, you know. So therefore, I have now pitched into the HR area as well, meaning that I'm now working on an IT platform, providing to my overseas clients that if they cannot travel to China, you know, they can use my HR platform to execute, for example, payment, for example, to execute approval of annual leave, for example, you know, using my platform to execute and monitoring the flow of their office, you know. And so now I am using this platform to pitch to that retail chain, very, very big. They have many just staff alone, you know, over 100 staff, but not accounting workers. They, you know, they do their manufacturing in the Greater Bay Area. Now, the inquiries that I have recently got, you know, for China are basically, you know, can be consisted of two parts. Number one is the IT part, high tech. Those companies from overseas, they want to come via Hong Kong using Hong Kong's tax system of 16.5 province tax to enter into China. 25% was the unified tax rate. But for the high tech, they definitely choose Shenzhen. They definitely choose Shenzhen, Greater Bay Area, where, you know, Shenzhen is fried for IT. And for the other sectors that my overseas clients are interested in is that, you know, they are eyeing on the big, huge population of China, 1.4 billion people right now. So, you know, my overseas clients, like including Latin America, they want to export their fruit products, their agricultural product. If I may, I can just name one prominent Latin American big exporter. It's called Campo Sol from Peru. You know, it's my client. They export a lot of fruits to China. So that is to say that whilst some sectors they are eyeing on the high tech, there are some basic you know, sectors, for example, agricultural sector, that a lot of overseas companies are eyeing on. So I would like to encourage, you know, the participants that are now attending this webinar, that if you are in business, do not get frustrated because of COVID. But this is really a good chance, you know, to thrive your business and to keep going. And personally, yes, I will invest a lot, you know, on the IT thing, because this is the way forward, you know, with webinars in future. Because, you know, I think even if there is no lockdown, or I myself, I won't travel so much. I'll be reaching 60 this year, you know. So I would lessen my traveling schedules. Okay. So webinars will be very, very popular in the future. IT will be very popular in the future. And another thing is work from home. Now, work from home is going to be very, very popular. And in fact, during this COVID crisis, you know, I have hired 4 more staff. That shows my business is growing despite of COVID. One Panama girl just now you met, and 1 Brazilian girl just now that you all met before the webinar, and also 2 part-time in China. Okay, because of COVID, there was a little bit of layoff, you know, in China also. So I grabbed 2 part-time lawyers. You know, 1 is now working in my Guangzhou office, and 1 now working part-time in my Shenzhen office. So that is the way forward. Part-time will become more and more popular in China, not only in Hong Kong. So I think that's all the positive sentiment I would like to share with all the participants. And just now, Mauricio, I like your introduction that there was a conference, you know, in 1911 in Manchuria, between China, Mexico, and USA. And today we are having one the same, So I hope that, we are not going to have one, in over 100 years. We're going to have another one maybe in a couple of months later. All right. So to this end, I leave this to you and Marlon, my dear friend. Okay. I think that's all from my side. If you have any questions, you can now raise it to me, Mauricio.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you very much, because your comments are very encouraging. Okay, of course, as you can imagine, because you all had that experience in China, throughout the crisis, we are all suffering of anxiety and uncertainty. And what you have shared with us, I mean, is very encouraging. Thank you. But I'm going to ask only one question. I don't want to take too much of your time. And you have been talking to us about inbound investment into Hong Kong and China. But what about outbound investment? Do you think that now, with this new environment, there will be more Chinese companies interested? You know very, very, very well the maquiladora industry in Mexico. So do you think that that's something that will be considered, will be, entertained by companies, or you think that is not really a sector that will have activity?
As a businessman, I count myself more a business invest future. So the way that I see it, because of the supply chain right now, it's disrupted temporary, So therefore, I am looking into the area of maquiladora, because I think that a lot of manufacturers, they want to cut short their transportation time. They want to cut short, their disruption, on the supply chain. They will start to think of, investing in Mexico, particularly in Tijuana. So they're in the concept of a maquiladora. Right now, I think there are maquiladora. Right now, I think there are over 6,000 entities in Mexico, in this maquiladora program, but of which over 5,000 are manufacturers. So if people can manufacture on spot in Mexico, they can ship the goods, directly to America, and then ship the goods from America to Canada. And in fact, last year, if you do remember, Mauricio, there was a listed company in Hong Kong asked me to do a research on maquiladora that I did the project together with you, right? So with this in mind, I am investing my China consultancy team, that I will ask them to look into how to lure some Chinese investors, all right, from China, not to relocate, but to invest a portion of their manufacturing, activities, in Mexico, so as to reap the profit. To reap the benefit of maquiladora that Mexico is providing. And riding on the NAFTA that was signed before, and now it's not called NAFTA. So anyway, I think the tripartite relationship between Mexico and US and Canada is still very, very strong. And then if Chinese investors want to, take part in the, in the increasing activities in these three countries, I think now is the time to invest in Mexico, So I would definitely, I am very positive on maquiladora. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Any final remarks, recommendations that you would like to share with us?
Yes. The final remarks that I would like to share very, very quickly is that about COVID. Right now in Hong Kong, we have only about 1,026 cases. There was no new cases yesterday in Hong Kong. And in China, we all know the total figure of COVID, in China, but that stemmed mainly from Wuhan. But of the three cities that I have offices, I'm monitoring that very, very closely, so as to keep the family and health motto of my firm, intact. So in Shanghai, the figure was 468 yesterday. In Guangzhou, it was 470 yesterday, and in Shenzhen and in Shenzhen it's 630. So it's a few hundred, in these three big cities. So I think lots of business activities are coming back, in these three cities. So the final remarks that I want to share with all the participants: do not just watch what you see on TV. Please, please listen to people like us who have the real experience, who have the real offices, in China. Because I look after the health, the well-being of my colleagues. So I would tell the truth, definitely I speak the truth. Okay, so only a few hundred cases in these three cities, and in Hong Kong, over 1,000 cases. And we got 6 straight days in Hong Kong that the new cases was only single digits. So I think things will be back to normal. But of course, personal hygiene is something that, we should not take for granted. We should always be careful. Despite of COVID or no COVID, we all should look after our health. Okay, thanks very much.
No, thank you very, very much, Thomas. And now I'm going to pass the mic to Valerie. Valerie Wang?
Yes.
Valerie?
Yes, I'm
Valerie,
online.
Well, yes, good morning there. Good morning there.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yes, well, I am very pleased to introduce Ms. Valerie Wang. Ms. Valerie Wang is an attorney. Hi, Valerie.
Hi.
Well, Ms. Wang is an attorney at Dentons, China. She has extensive experience in handling various types of complex domestic and cross-border transactions. Indeed, I'm going to say that I had the privilege of doing some work with her. Okay, so I'm not reading this. I know this, okay? And that includes international M&As, overseas investments, foreign direct investment, corporate and compliance matters. And these transactions include laws from multiple jurisdictions, including clients from the US, China, and Europe, in many sectors such as manufacturing, food, recreation, international trade, and dispute resolution. And she also has assisted Chinese clients investing in Mexico. Okay, so this is very important. Well, Valerie is the one to go if there's a company interested in understanding the Chinese side of doing business in Mexico. She's graduated as a lawyer from the Shandong University School of Law. She has an LLM from Vanderbilt University Law School in New York. And Ms. Wang is admitted in both the People's Republic of China Bar and the New York State Bar. So, Valerie, thank you very much again.
Thank you.
And we look forward to hearing your insights and your comments on what was your experience, what did you see with your clients, with your firm, as far as all these COVID-19 crisis in Shanghai and all of that area.
Oh, thank you, Mauricio, for your kind introduction. First, I want to introduce myself a little bit. I am an attorney from Dentons, China. I am based in the Shanghai office, and I am also one new member of your association. I have already submitted my application to Marlene some days ago. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Valerie. Welcome to the chamber, as well as Thomas. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to share some of my personal experiences during the COVID-19 breakout, based on my own experience in Shanghai. We first learned about the breakout of we first learned about the breakout of the COVID-19 on TV from, I think, January the 14th, which is like 10 days before the Spring Festival of China. And that day, the experts from the Chinese government said on TV there's human-to-human transmission of the COVID-19. So the next day when I board on the subway, I see everyone was like very panic about that, and half of the people are wearing masks. Some of them are wearing N95 masks. So I can see the panic in some of the passengers' eyes, because that was only 10 days before the Spring Festival, and the migrant workers are starting to go back home. So the compartment of the subway is very crowded. So from that day on, everyone was wearing masks, and 1 week later, the green code system was introduced by the Chinese government. So some of you may not know about the green code, so I can give you a little short introduction about it. This is developed by Alipay, which is the sister company of Alibaba Group, the biggest e-commerce group in China. And if you fill in your own information and do a Face ID check, they will assign you a house code. The house code are of 3 colors. One is green, one is yellow, and the other is red. If you present a green, if you have a green code, that means that you are healthy. So you can give the green code to the guard of any public places like restaurants, malls, or public parks to show that you are healthy, so you are allowed to enter. But if you have a red code, that means you are infected and you should be hospitalized. And if you are having a yellow code, that means you have already contacted with a already infected case, so you should be quarantined, both self quarantine or centralized quarantine. So these different colors of codes made the government can enable the government to figure out who has like the COVID-19 symptoms and who is healthy. So this is basically the main regime for the government to manage or to figure out who is healthy and who is sick. So the communities are enforcing the green code too. For instance, in my own residential quarter, if we want to enter our house in the residential quarter, we must show the guard outside. Show the green code. Show the green code to the guard outside. So if we do not have the green code, or if you did not bring your smartphones, you're not allowed to enter, or you should like check in the public security bureau. It's like it's what they do 2 months ago. Now it is the measures have been loosened, but 2 months ago it was very strict. Everyone should have their smartphones, have their codes checked. So after your codes are checked, you have to the guards will take your temperatures by infrared forehead thermometer. So because literally you can borrow other cell phones to show them the green code if you want to, but they will double check your own temperature by an infrared thermometer, forehead thermometer, to ensure that you are indeed okay. Yes. And besides the code, I think there is another measure to manage the COVID-19 is the PCR test. So anyone comes from Wuhan, the city of Wuhan, or any high-risk areas in Hubei province should take the PCR test. So does the people come from overseas nowadays, because the government officials and their designated volunteers have some spots in the airplane, in the airports. So when you leave the customs, they will ask you to do the PCR test. So if the PCR test result is negative, then you are asked to be quarantined at your home for 14 days. During that period, the community workers will deliver the foods to you and to take your temperature every day. For the passengers who has like positive results, then you will go to the centralized quarantine in designated hotels by the government. So you will receive respective treatments if your test result is positive. Yes, and the last measure for the government to control the COVID-19 is to divide the city into three kinds of areas. One is like high risk areas. The other one is medium risk areas, and the other is low risk areas. So only the people stays in the low risk areas are have the permission to mobilize. So if your home is in the high risk areas, or if your companies are in the high risk areas, so you you may have like stricter measures to for your mobilization. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. And let me ask you a question
Yes.
on the businesses, okay, companies.
Yes.
Companies, what do you see are the challenges that companies are facing or have faced to reopen? We've learned that 90% plus of the companies in China
Yes.
have opened business again. So, of what you saw with your clients and with in general in Shanghai, what were the challenges they had to reopen, number one? And number two, what are the challenges that you see they will have in the future to get at full speed?
Yes, I see. Thank you for your question. This is a very good question. So, from my standpoint, although like 90% of the companies have been reopened, but not all these companies have are 100% recovered from the epidemic, because first some of the Hubei is a very important province that a lot of workers are flowing to Shanghai. So because people in Hubei, if you are coming to Shanghai, you have to get a PCR test, you have to do the quarantine. So so Hubei employees are not able to get back to work. So this is a factor that affects many of the companies. And the second is because there are accidental cases every day nowadays. Yeah, some of the cases are reported, but some of the cases are not reported. They are considered as cases under observation, so these are not like publicized. So companies are very afraid of this kind of case, are very afraid of these kind of cases, and they do not want that happen in their factories, because people are very crowded in every factory. So if one person was infected, then the other person are dangerous. So the little to medium-sized business owners, they do not want this to happen, and the government will urge them to restock some protective gears for their employees, like N95 masks, gloves, and sanitizers, things like that. And this the government will inspect them very regularly. So this is another factor that bothers the medium to small sized business owners, because they already have like fewer workers now than before, and the government will just exert some pressures and will oblige them to buy this and buy that. So this is some of them are just very unhappy about it. And for like small sized business owners such as restaurants, people, it was hit badly by the epidemic, because people are encouraged to take their own food to work, not to dine out, because no one likes to dine out these days. People are still very cautious about the COVID-19 disease. And for the travel industry will are hit very badly by the epidemic. I have added some of the agents of the travel agency on my WeChat account, because sometimes we need to rent a car. We need to ask them to rent a car if we are traveling abroad or to other cities. Some of them are, 50% of the travel agents on my WeChat account have been laid off during the epidemic, because there's no job during the Spring Festival, because Spring Festival was considered to be a very important season for Chinese to having vacations in Southeast China, or even further in Europe or America. But in this Spring Festival, no one are traveling. They are only staying at home. So it was hit. The travel industry was hit very badly. And for the manufacturing industry, yeah, the big manufacturers are urged to reopen by the government because the government wants to keep the GDP growth now. But actually, like only 50% of the like the production were resumed because this is what one of my clients said to me. Their warehouse is already filled with the goods, which they should be shipped to their foreign clients, but because of the epidemic is widespread in United States and Europe, so they do not have the have the way to ship them out to their clients. So they are not continuing manufacturing these goods because their warehouse is almost full. And one of my clients is a manufacturer of babies diapers. She said to me the what is called the melt blown fabrics, which is very important which is very important for manufacturing diapers, is also very important in manufacturing the masks. So these melt blown fabrics are all purchased by vendors to make masks. So the melt blown fabrics is very expensive for those who manufactures diapers and things like that. So this would be very difficult for trade for small to medium firms doing foreign trade. Yeah.
Thank you very, very much, Valerie. And it's very interesting what you share with us about these red, yellow, and orange divides, okay? Because that means that, of course, in these times, okay, there are opportunities, creativity. So this is an excellent example. So thank you very, very much, Valerie, for your insights.
Thank you.
Okay. No, thank you. And I'm going to pass the mic to finish our panelists' presentations. Our next panelist is Mr. Malcolm McNeil. He's a U.S. lawyer with over 35 years of litigation and experience. You can see his resume on the screen. And the fields of his practice are indeed, very rich in business, commercial, in construction, employment disputes, administrative proceedings, trade secrets, probate, media and entertainment, intellectual property, partnership dissolutions and real estate, and of course, cross-border negotiations. And for 25 years, he has resolved civil disputes as a mediator. He's a mediator for the U.S. District Court Central District of California. And he's well known for his leadership and accomplishments for clients with interest in China. So then this is interesting. And another evidence, okay, of his expertise is that he's a panel member of the Shenzhen Court of International Arbitration, or the Beijing International Arbitration Commission, and the Harbin Arbitration Commission. And he also is a co-leader of R.N. Fox's, his firm, International Group, and the vice president of the Beverly Hills Bar Association. Malcolm, welcome, and thank you for your remarks.
Thank you for that introduction, Mauricio. It's my pleasure to be here. First of all, I want to thank everyone that has already spoken, because the comments made by Tom and Harley and Valerie, they're informative to me also, because every day I find myself dealing with a new group of questions. And yes, I had my own office for 20 years, so that's why I have such a wide variety of a practice. I've dealt with clients in all sectors. And what I try to do to get clients to manage what's going on right now in terms of their own let's say, well-being, as was mentioned earlier by Tom, as I say, look, this too shall pass. The good news that we're facing right now is that everybody seems to be hit one way or another by the impact of the coronavirus, and everybody shares the concern that they want to keep their lights on and the doors open. And depending upon the nature of the business, that's going to depend on what keeping the doors open means. We've had, I tell people that there's a great quote, and that quote comes from, I think it was attributed to Martin Luther King, and it says, you know, if you can't fly, run, and if you can't run, walk, and if you can't walk, you crawl, but whatever you do, you move forward. And I told clients that rather than focus on what's going on in the past, focus on what is going on in your business today, focus on what it is that you need to plan for the future, and don't rely too much on statistics. And that's not to undercut anything that anyone has said here regarding statistics, but we live in a world right now, I think globally, where there seems to be a lack of confidence. There's a lack of confidence in the media, where there are political considerations. Everybody's worried about a whole host of things that are outside of their control. So if they continue to think that way, they're going to find that they're not going to make any decision. And I've told them that inaction is an action. So what you need to do is to go back to a question you asked earlier, Mauricio, about how long will this last? Well, I'll give you the impressions that I have gotten. It depends really on what industry you are in, because I represent clients in tourism. I represent an aviation ground handling company, which went from 780 employees down to 7. So when will they recover? Well, they were going to recover perhaps little by little as the airlines open up and as the flights increase, but it's not going to be in a period of 3 to 6 to 9 months. It's going to be gradual, and it's going to be over a period of time. And the question for the clients is, how do we keep our doors open in the interim? And the way for them to keep their doors open is to do what we talked about earlier, and it means to be innovative and to be entrepreneurial. But then when I put on my litigator's hat, I already have people contacting me saying, they're not buying the product. I think it was Valerie that brought up a comment earlier that the factories are full. Yes, if you're in the retail sector, the question is, when will the retail sector recover? Tomorrow, if we had a vaccine miraculously tomorrow, nobody's necessarily going to accept that. It's going to take a long time for the caution and the concern and the fear to ebb away in order for there to be what we're talking about, which is business as usual. So I am telling people to plan for 9 to 12 months of cash flow issues, of decision making, employment decision making, readjusting contracts, being flexible with their suppliers. And on the corporate governance level, I think one of the things, besides the fact that many of us have an even greater appreciation of our personal hygiene as a result of what's going on and washing our hands and doing all of the things that we should have been doing anyway. But another one is that there are great opportunities, which I wanted to focus on, but which are concurrent between South America and specifically Mexico and China, because one of the big news stories is when companies are dealing with a single supply chain and that supply chain is disrupted for any reason, then if they had a single supply chain, is there a corporate governance issue? Was the board remiss and breaching a fiduciary duty? Were the officers breaching a fiduciary duty? It would seem to me that is going to seep into the boardroom and be part of the new normal. And therefore, what that means is that if their supply chain was previously coming from China or anywhere else in the world, or Southeast Asia or Taiwan or Korea or Mexico, etc., you'd better be making contingency plans as you diversify your supply chain, just so that you don't get caught in a disruption like this. Because tomorrow's board of directors and tomorrow's group of officers is not going to be able to say, gee, I thought I only had to get my parts and accessories and everything assembled here. Well, the question is, you better have contingency plans in place. So while business is disrupted today, I'm advising clients, start thinking about tomorrow and what there's things you can do today. You can start to explore other marketplaces for your goods, services, and so forth. It may sound weird, because everybody is essentially wanting to shut down. It's sort of like talking to a restaurant that has 25 locations and saying, where are you going to open your next restaurants? Well, that may sound like a strange question, but it really isn't, because the mere fact that we're trying to survive through this process is not a means to stop flying or walking or crawling, as the saying went earlier. So I'm trying to get clients to think in terms of managing cash flow, and also what their business is going to look like in the post-coronavirus arena, because that 9 to 12 month period that I mentioned earlier is a period of time that is fluid. It's fluid depending upon where you are in the supply chain, where you are in just the business chain of doing business. My client's business that I mentioned a moment ago, the ground handling company, that company is going to be dependent upon what the airlines do and and how their flights open up, and those flights are going to open up again, going back to the word I mentioned before, which is consumer confidence. Once the vaccine, and again, I use the miraculous in order to get people thinking about it, I use the miraculous phrase of a vaccine has been created. Well, it's not an on or off switch right now. It is a gradual process. It's going to be turning the knob to get back to where we were before. And that if you're not thinking about where you're going to be, not 9 to 12 months from now, but 3, 6, 9 months from now, and say, where will you be in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, and create those contingency plans, then you may not survive, because you're not resilient enough and flexible enough to be able to pull on the strengths that your business has. Another client of mine was asking the question about, well, what are we going to do about trade shows and so forth? Well, I agree with Tom earlier that I think I'll tell you one thing. I'm pretty computer savvy myself. I travel being the international co-leader. I've actually had lunch with Tom in Hong Kong, and I've had lunch with clients in Beijing, Shanghai, Paris, Rome, Prague, you name it. But a lot of the things that we used to do are now going to be done through IT, but there's still that element of personal contact and attention that's necessary for the development of business. We need trade shows. We need networking events. We can only do so much through our process of these wonderful webinars, because I've been living in the webinar stream. I'm now an expert on WebEx and Zoom and Microsoft meetings. I mean, when I say expert, I'm a lawyer, and I never say I'm an expert in anything, but on that, I will tell you I'm an expert. So and that's because that's been the way of life now, and I will adopt much of that for my practice in the future, but not all of it. And as an arbitrator, we're seeing that the litigation and arbitration world has been disrupted too. Clients are asking me now, can I sue somebody for something? Because they haven't, as I said earlier, that they haven't bought something. We have an arbitration that's now been postponed overseas that was supposed to go forward on March 21st. It was postponed until June 21st, and now the parties are talking about postponing it until 2021. So then the big question comes up for them, as I said, well, you can go forward. Most of the arbitration tribunals these days are setting up their own IT methods of holding an arbitration. Do you want to hold an arbitration via this type of a medium through an IT, where I can cross-examine you as a witness over the internet, or you can be making your argument to me as an arbitrator? So that's going to take some that slowed down the process, but I think some of that will get adopted too. But I don't think we should overplay what is going on now in terms of giving up on the things that are actually drivers for the economy, which, as I said earlier, are going to be face-to-faces, networks, trade shows, and so forth. My biggest concern really is for retail, because I have a lot of retail clients. I have clients in the health and beauty industry. I have clients in fashion, and we do all kinds of things for them. And they don't want to spend money now on. They've laid off in some cases they've laid off their R&D folks. Okay, in other words, they're innovative folks, the ones that are preparing for next year's fashions and the ones that are preparing for the new products. And the question is going to be, when we miraculously have that vaccine, does the consumer immediately turn around and start spending money on those kinds of consumer products? And I fear that the answer is, I think the obvious answer is no. I think everybody's going to be cautious, whether it's cars, fashion, retail, whatever it may be. And Valerie hit on it earlier. How soon will the retail industry, how soon will the restaurant industry open up again? What will happen to those workers? How long will it take for social distancing even if we have restrictions on it now, and the president was talking about reopening and having social distancing in those situations. But again, we can have the rules in place, but what about consumer confidence? So that's the biggest issue that I worry about. And I tell clients, I don't have all the answers, but I have the questions that you must be thinking about and make your best estimates and your best guesstimates, even if you don't know specifically what is going to happen. Because there was and I wanted to end on a very positive note, because one of the other statements that somebody made, I think it was Isabel Allende, by the way, she said, we don't know how strong we are until we are forced to bring out that hidden strength. So that's, I think, what we're seeing now. We are strong, and we do have those hidden strengths. We don't always have the chance to display them, but now is the time to display them.
Good. Well, it's something very interesting that you mentioned, Malcolm, is the vaccines. But what about a cure? Do you think that a cure would have a different perspective or a different reaction of the public? And of course, well, how do you see the cure versus vaccine? We understand that vaccine, as you said, is going to take 18 months, 2 years, and the cure, I don't know. Every day I hear different stories. So what do you have on that?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head when you said every day you hear different stories. Now I go back to those unfortunate magic 3 words that I mentioned earlier, lack of confidence, because the question becomes, does it make a difference? I remember in the very beginning of all of this, hearing some pundits and experts in the medical realm saying wearing a mask doesn't make a difference. And I'm sure everybody remembers that there was folks saying that, and then all of a sudden masks are now mandatory in most places. So I do think that if there is a cure, it would make a difference, but I still think you're going to have the general public, by our nature, we're going to be careful with our spouses and our grandparents and our parents and our children, and there's going to be a slow evolution and rollout until the confidence level demonstrates that it is okay. We live in, I'll state the trite and the obvious. We live in the internet generation where any opinion, I can pull up an opinion for you on any topic in any direction. Okay, that's the problem we're facing right now. And the problem is that there are doubters. That's what I meant earlier about the political season. It's a political football. If a cure comes up, if any remedy comes up, it's going to be questioned. It's going to be scrutinized. There's going to be naysayers, and that process has to evolve until the confidence comes back. It may shorten the period of time, but it may shorten it, but it will not eliminate it.
Eliminate it, exactly. Okay, well, thank you. Let me ask you a final question, Malcolm, if I may. And this, of course, has to do with China. Okay, in your experience with your clients, okay, that are doing business with China, what are the typical concerns, okay, from a legal standpoint or from a business standpoint, and what advice are you giving them?
Well, I'm telling them to not trust information that they get. There's an old Reaganism, I think, was trust but verify. The problem with statistics that we've been hearing, remember, I'm a lawyer, so I need to have evidence, right? And so when we hear about the factories reopening, and we hear about if a statistic says that 90% have reopened, the question is, what does that mean when we say it reopen? Did it reopen to 100% of its vigor from before? Or does it mean that they brought in 3 employees out of 1,500 to get the doors open? And is it something that can be relied on as a true measure of the opening up of the economy? So I'm having clients right now that have supply chain issues in electronics, and some in textiles. And so while we're hearing those statistics, I'm basically saying you must have a better opportunity to gauge what you're being told and to see what the impact on your business is. And for the future, the biggest issue is, think about it a year from now. A client comes to me and says, McNeil, I'm going to open a factory making widgets. Where should I go? And I say, well, and by the way, I've been going to China since 1993. I'm a strong supporter of China. In the late 90s, I helped Chinese companies grow and emerge here in the States. I'm representing Chinese companies in litigation. I go to China, 3 or 4 times a year. I have in the past, and as a result of that, I say, well, do you want to open your factory in China? Now you're going to have some reluctance. There's going to be a question about, well, can I get the management employees that I want there? Will I be able to get the expertise in China that I'm going to want? Maybe I will look at alternatives that maybe are closer to home, perhaps Mexico. Okay, the issue that goes in line with the comments I made earlier regarding the supply chain, and that is that the supply chain should be diversified, and also China will be, I think, at least for a period of time, a little bit of a less attractive locale. Everybody in the 90s, when I was going for the first time for my first adventures into business between US and China in the 90s, everybody wanted to go into China. Everybody wanted to go, low labor costs, an exciting environment, lots of opportunities. You could make anything from wallpaper to lighting materials to whatever you want to call it, and you could bring it in. The prices were low. Everybody was excited. Now there was nothing like this that overshadowed it. Yes, there were some political considerations that overshadowed it, but that didn't stop the zeal and the excitement for doing business in China. Now, next year, this is going to be in everybody's memory very, very fresh. So will that chill some of those folks wanting to go in? Will it chill people wanting to accept, for example, an executive or management position in China? I think the answer is absolutely, but the question is to what extent? How long will it take for that to wear off? So clients are looking at it from that standpoint, and there are also there are always going to be trade and political considerations. To what extent is the election coming up? And the look, the trade war is behind us, presumably, with the phase 1 deal. But we now have an issue that's going to come up where China is supposed to be purchasing about $350 billion of very specific goods and products, and there's already indications that China is going to ask for a reprieve from that, considering the COVID-19 slowdown. So how is that going to impact the relationship between the countries? So those are the, again, these are not unknowables. They're not unknowables. We cannot know, but we can certainly plan for them and have a plan A and a plan B depending upon which way we think it's going to fall.
Good. Well, thank you very, very much, Malcolm, for your remarks. Okay, and well, thank you. This finishes our panel presentation, and thank you very much, Harley, Thomas, Valerie, Malcolm. Again, thank you for your generous remarks. Very valuable. This is really, exceeding our expectations as far as what to learn. Okay, from the Chinese experience. Okay. On this handling of the COVID-19. So then thank you very much. And I'm going to pass the mic to our executive director, to Marlene. And I thank you for your patience and your attention.
Thank you very much indeed to all of you. We very much appreciate this wonderful information directly from China that we cannot get it better and more accurate than all of you. So we're very pleased to have you. It's a true honor. And then now I'm going to conduct some of the questions from our guests. We have a question that says, is the long Pacific Ocean supply chain no longer viewed as a liability, susceptible to disruption from natural or man-made disasters? Does that mean that the Chinese economy will not return to pre-COVID-19 levels? I'm not sure which one of you will be interested in answering that question.
I would be happy to tackle that. This is Hardy. I think it's important to keep in mind that China is no longer really the workshop of the world. 15 years ago, I was quoted in the paper as saying the days of China as the workshop of the world are over. And what we have to look at China is China itself as a market to which we can sell. 15 years ago, I said, if you're planning on coming to China to manufacture for export, don't come. You're not wanted. Chinese government doesn't want you. People don't want you. You're not going to really be that effective or profitable here. But when you look at the size of Chinese economy, 5 times the population, a very rapidly growing consumer population at about 23% growth a year. You look at last year, the retail sales in China were up some 19%. We need to look at China in 2 different prisms. Yes. Is China going to continue to manufacture low-cost items for export to the rest of the world? I think they're going to continue to do some of that simply because there is savings in economy of the scale. If you come into manufacture for 5 times the population in China, you can still export some of your product. But one of the things that has happened when we look at 2003, for example, less than 23% of American companies in South China were selling what they made in China to China. As of our study this year, 71% of our companies are no longer in export business. They're primarily here producing goods and services in China for the Chinese market. They barely have enough capability to export out of China. And as a matter of fact, they import quite a bit of products from overseas in order to complement what they make and sell in China. China, we need to look at a different point of view completely. China, not as a workshop of the world. I think what China has done is continue to try to find ways to build its own consumer-based economy, service-based economy, and I think it will succeed at that. And if you begin to look at it from that point of view, of course, there's going to be substantial investments coming into China, not to use Chinese labor, because we have we're 2 million workers short here in South China today, but to come here to produce and to sell to China. And if you come to sell to China, you're producing here, your cost, your labor cost, your product costs are going to be the same as that for the Chinese company. So success is going to be quite substantial. If we look at China from a different pair of glasses than we do now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carly. And we have another question for Malcolm. Are you seeing China clients asserting impossibility, impracticability, or force majeure to avoid performance?
The short answer is absolutely. I'm seeing it on both ends, by the way. I mean, I have a client right here who's purchased one that I was referring to earlier, who's an OEM in China and has agreed to purchase a certain amount of goods per month, and they've just stopped buying because they're no longer selling. So they're asking for the advice and counsel on force majeure, impossibility, frustration of purpose, and the answer. And everybody knows about these things, which is interesting. That's why I'm getting the curious questions. They're not asking me, is there a way to get out of this contract, which they might have asked me before. They're asking me, what does force majeure mean? And the reason is because their emails are being flooded with experts. When I say that, I mean lawyers, accountants, auditors, etc., talking about those defenses in a contract. And the clients who are trying to enforce the contracts are asking me, force majeure doesn't apply here, does it? And the ones who don't want to continue the contract are saying force majeure does apply here, doesn't it? So it's created a lot of curiosity. And in California, we actually have several different defenses and so if you, and by the way, I caution everyone, because I read these things that come in and I get them from other colleagues, and some of it is not accurate. So the best thing to do is to, I know it sounds like a commercial, but seek some legal advice and ask a lawyer, does force majeure apply in these circumstances with the contract that I have? And then you're going to be able to see, because we're having the same issue with insurance and business interruption insurance. Agents are telling clients, and people are reading articles saying that business interruption insurance does or does not apply in a given circumstances, and they're issuing opinions over over the phone, and I'm telling clients, if you think you have a loss, make an insurance claim. Make the claim. Let one of the insurance adjusters send you a letter and let you know whether or not you have coverage. That's how you'll know, not by an anecdotal article that you get. So the short answer is yes, the force majeure defenses are coming on both sides as to whether or not somebody's trying to enforce or not enforce, and they're looking to when they're looking. It depends on whether you're buying or selling.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Malcolm. And we have one last question that it says, in addition to modifying the work week and remote schedule of his employees, can Mr. Wong talk about what he and other businesses did and are continuing to do with respect to re-entry and the social aspects of life and work in the office when we look down as lifted for his community? What the lockdown gradually lifted or a general lift all at once?
Yes, I would like to say a few words on this. So the effect of some people may not be very accustomed to the lockdown yet, and even after the lockdown is now lifted, some people are still not yet accustomed. For example, now the food delivery is one thing that people are now going less to restaurants right now, and then you see a lot of food delivery from door to door right now, and the use of what we call online orders are getting more rampant in China as well as in Hong Kong right now. So even after the lockdown is lifted in China, we see a lot of online deliveries and people not, patronizing the restaurants like before. As for the office, people might be very sensitive now, especially the young ones. I would say that they are very conscious about their health right now. The way that I see the youngsters are not doing the same as I was when I was young. As when I was young, I was very valiant, but now the youngsters seem to be overly protected. In China, even after the lockdown, now luckily for my practice in China, only just one staff has resigned even after the lockdown. Just only one staff. All right. So because in China, we have been adopting the one-child policy for many years already. So I think the children are very, in a way, overly, looked after. So even with this lockdown, or even it is after the lockdown, the parental influence, is very prominent. It's very conspicuous, So this will affect, I think, in a way, culturally, or the way of the development in the future generations. So I would like to encourage, the youngsters, to be more active, in their social life, after when things really return to normal. Personally, I do not believe in things like social distancing. I do not believe in really wetness, even though now I'm forced to use it. I believe still in the face-to-face, contact. And this is very strong in China with our culture. We like to visit people. We like to see people face to face. So I think gradually, even though we might have a new order, but the old values will still persist. So I think that is my general comment. I don't know whether I have answered that question, which is a very long one.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it, Thomas. And although we were going to finish, there is just one last quick question, and then we'll wrap up. But somebody is asking me, when will the air cargo will get reestablished in China and in Hong Kong?
Now, first of all, for the air cargo part, I think people. I would only talk about the Hong Kong part. For the China part, I have no idea about that. So maybe I leave it to Harley. All right. So for the Hong Kong part, ironically, the air flights, only the air cargos are very busy right now. Because we still sending a lot of postage or even shipment of masks to overseas. Like yesterday, I shipped some masks to overseas. Some surgical masks. So the air cargo flights in Hong Kong, their business are doing very good. Not Cathay or not other airlines. The air cargo flights are ironically doing very good business right now. So I don't know what's the situation in China.
Sure, I can add that FedEx, for example, has added 145 new aircraft to the Guangzhou route to serve China, to make up for the difference that has been created, the void has been created by lack of commercial flights, which are limited to one per week per country. I think they're doing the best they can. The issue is that there's not enough capacity. There are not enough aircrafts to handle to make up the void that has been created. But there's certainly a lot of movement. Companies are doing the best they can. As I said, some companies are doing really well because of the demand for their services, and there's some companies who will wait to recover a while later.
Thank you very much, Harley. And with that saying, I think we're going to close our program. It's already almost 2 hours, and there is a lot of people still on the line. We still have 40 people on our line. That means that there is a lot of interest, and to hear this. With that saying, we're going to discuss internally on putting these seminars once again, repeat it, because there is a lot of information that we can get directly from China and Southeast Asia as well, with other friends that we have there. And I want to thank, of course, our very distinguished speakers, Harley, Valerie, Thomas, Mauricio, and Mark Levinson, our president. Thank you all very much for joining us, and invite you. We are putting together 2 more webinars. We're inviting a senior economist from Citibank from Mexico City that will talk about the current economic and financial situation in Mexico, and a very high level from the central bank as well. And another event that we're putting together is the Secretary of Tourism of Mexico, and the measurements that the Mexican government is doing to promote and revitalize and have ideas and incentives for the tourism that is the 3 largest source of income for our country. So with that saying, we thank you all very much. Good morning, China, and good night to all of our friends on this side of the world. And sending you a big hug, a virtual hug, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was great.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Good night. Good afternoon, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good evening.
So for all the colleagues, we have a little bit of debriefing, all right? So before I send off these 2 friends of mine, all right? Okay. So,